Good morning. Welcome, and thank you for standing by for the press conference call with the House Democratic Caucus National Security Task Force. This morning, they'll be discussing President Biden's recent announcement on the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Currently, all reporters are in a listen-only mode until our question and answer session at the end of our program. At any time, reporters may enter the question and answer queue by pressing *3 on your phone. If you change your mind and want to withdraw the question, press *3 again, and you will be removed from the queue. Again, at any time, interested reporters may press *3 to enter the question queue. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn the press conference over to the Vice Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Representative Pete Aguilar of California. Vice Chair Aguilar, please begin.
Thank you so much, Christy, and thank you all for joining us on today's call. Yesterday, President Biden made a historic announcement signifying a key shift in our nation's foreign policy. As he mentioned, the U.S. military presence in Afghanistan has now spanned 4 presidencies, and I commend President Biden on ensuring that this decision does not fall to a 5th. The goals that were laid out when we first moved troops to Afghanistan 2 decades ago have been accomplished, and I'm grateful for the President's leadership in making this decision to focus on diplomacy and to keep our service members out of harm's way. I also want to echo the President's remarks and express my gratitude to all of the service members who have bravely served in Afghanistan and thank them for their sacrifices they've made to keep us safe here at home. Some of those service members we serve here within Congress as well, and we're appreciative of their efforts. We'll continue today's call with brief remarks from our distinguished members leading the Caucus National Security Task Force. After those presentations, we'll open up the call for your questions. I'll now yield to co-chair of the House Democratic Caucus National Security Task Force, Representative Jason Crow. Jason, you're up.
Thank you, Vice Chair Aguilar, and thank you to my colleagues, Representatives Kim and Cheryl. Always honored to stand with you on these important issues. After 2 combat tours in Afghanistan as an Army Ranger and a member of the Joint Special Operations Task Force, this is a very personal issue to me. For those of us who fought in Afghanistan and lost friends, a certain part of us will always be in Afghanistan. But as a member of Congress now, I also know that there's no military solution to this. If there had been a military solution, we would have found one many years ago, and after 20 years, we have to have a shift in course. There is risk everywhere in the world. We face risk in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, in South America, and our own homeland. So the issue is not whether or not there is risk in Afghanistan, but whether or not the limited resources that we have available merit a continued presence and expense of billions of dollars and thousands of troops. And that is the question facing us. And I have certainly some concerns about making sure that we are putting some guardrails in place, and I look forward to working with the administration. But I approach this issue as much a veteran as a member of Congress. I started my military career as a private, and I think about my time as Private Crow. And that's why I have outlined a couple of priorities to the administration that I look forward to working with them on over the next couple of months. And the first of those is protecting our troops. As we draw down and there are fewer and fewer troops in Afghanistan and fewer soldiers remaining to defend our operating bases, those who are remaining are more and more vulnerable. I will be using my positions as a member of the Intelligence Committee and the Armed Services Committee to ask those tough questions and make sure that we are doing right by our men and women in uniform. The second is honoring our allies. NATO went there with us. They fought and have died alongside us for the last 20 years. There are, in fact, more NATO troops in Afghanistan than there are U.S. troops right now. And the only time in the history of NATO that the Article 5 self-defense obligations have been invoked was after 9/11. So we have to make sure we're doing this in coordination with our allies as well. And the last is putting some process in place to do right by those many Afghanis, those thousands of Afghanis, men and women who served as translators, served alongside us, and at great personal risk to themselves and their families are now at risk as we draw down. We have to make sure that we are drastically ramping up the special immigrant visa program and other processes to get folks out of the country for their own safety and the safety of their families in the months ahead. So we will all be engaging with the administration. There is a federal law in the National Defense Authorization Act that passed earlier this year that requires the administration under Section 1215 to engage with Congress and have this conversation about the issues I outlined. And I look forward to working with the administration to do just that. So it's my pleasure to pass this over to Representative Kim. Representative Kim.
Thank you, Jason. Thanks everyone for joining up here. This is Andy Kim here. I want to just start by taking a step back here and just thinking about and reflecting upon the time that we live in right now. We're currently living through this paradigm shift in global politics. This is a moment that is akin to that of 9/11 and the fall of the Berlin Wall, where we are entering a new era of foreign policy. Now the question is, what is this going to look like? And that's very much up in the air right now. We were already heading in this direction even before the pandemic with this rise of great power competition. But the pandemic and COVID-19 has made this a much more definitive break from the previous moment that we lived in before. And with this question of what is this world going to look like? What is this new paradigm and era of global politics going to look like? We then need to think about what is the United States' role in shaping this new era in a way that is going to strengthen the potential for American continued global leadership. That is a responsibility that we all have. And we cannot just allow that for us to move through this new era passively. Instead, we should be taking strong steps to be able to set the terms in which this new era will be shaped. There is a certain malleability to the international system during these changes and paradigm shifts, and these tectonic plates are shifting beneath us right now. And now is our effort to try to harness the full potential of the United States national security capabilities to be able to shape this in a way advantageous for America. What we saw yesterday was the emergence of a Biden doctrine that recognizes this shift in global politics, recognizing that this is a historic moment for us to step up and say definitively that we are going to step up and do everything we can to shape this in the direction that would be most advantageous for America's continued leadership, for our continued strength of our economy, and our continued national security and ability to protect the American people and our interests. We see some of the core principles of this Biden doctrine emerging, about focus on American competitiveness, of strengthening our global infrastructure through alliances and a reinvestment in international institutions, as well as a posture for addressing transnational threats, including the pandemic and climate change, and recognizing that transnational problems require transnational solutions, and we need to be much more prepared for that going forward. So I see this as an important marker and a historic marker in pushing forward the kind of resolve that we need to address the next 50 years. The next era of foreign policy. And for us to emerge out from this pandemic into a world that's different from the one that we socially distanced from, with a kind of resolve and aggressiveness and momentum that we need to, rather than just emerging passively and allowing other actors to define the environment in which we are living in. So I just wanted to provide a bit of that context from what I see, that this is such a monumental decision for so many reasons. But for me, I'm very much focused on what happens next and how we win this next era. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Vice Chair Aguilar, and to everyone for being here. I'm really glad to be here alongside my co-chairs, Reps Kim and Crow. We're really excited to be leading this task force, and I'm personally happy to be serving alongside Andy and Jason, who bring such a depth of expertise around these issues, as you've just heard. Yesterday's announcement was not one that any of us took lightly. We have friends and loved ones who've given their lives in Afghanistan, many who have come back but continue to suffer from combat-related service in Afghanistan, and their families who suffer alongside them. But those sacrifices have allowed us here at home to be safe from further major terrorist attacks like we saw on 9/11. But we've now been in this conflict for 20 years, and Afghanistan is no longer a haven for al-Qaeda. The Afghan people have a democratically elected government. Women and girls are going to school and participating in the public arena, particularly in the urban areas. So we can't continue this cycle of extending our military presence to create perfect conditions for withdrawal. I really applaud the president for the deliberative way that he's made this decision. His announcement yesterday came after months of consultation with experts, our national security and defense officials, and importantly, our allies. It's been such a marked contrast to the former president's handling of this issue. I think it speaks volumes that the Secretary General of NATO stood alongside Secretary Austin and Secretary Blinken yesterday to discuss the path forward. And after our announcement, our allies, those same allies who have stood shoulder to shoulder with us since the aftermath of 9/11 to this day, they made similar announcements. We're acting in concert. I know there are concerns about the impact of our withdrawal and the impact it will have on Afghanistan, so I want to highlight a really important fact. We're withdrawing combat troops, but we're not ending our relationship with Afghanistan. We'll continue to have a robust diplomatic and humanitarian presence there, and we'll continue to invest in Afghanistan's stability, infrastructure, and national defense. So with that, I'm going to yield back to our operator so we can move on to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, and to all of the co-chairs of the House Democratic National Security Task Force for offering your perspective this morning. As the Congresswoman said, we are now ready to begin the Q&A portion of this morning's call. Any reporter can enter into the queue by pressing *3 on your telephone. If you change your mind and want to withdraw the question, press *3 again. Again, to ask a question of our members, press *3. I see we have a couple questions in the queue. Our first question this morning comes from Eric Wasson of Bloomberg. Eric, you may go ahead.
Hi, thanks so much for doing this call. My question is about what happens in Afghanistan after we withdraw. I mean, is it inevitable that the Taliban come back to power? And if not, what should the U.S. and specifically Congress do to reduce the chances of that? Thank you so much.
This is Mikey Sherrill. So right now, the Taliban has a large role in areas of government, especially in some of the tribal areas. I think they have a role to play here. What we want to do is make sure that through our diplomatic, humanitarian, economic efforts, that we still can support the Afghan government, that we can still support the gains we've made for women and girls, so that while continuing to ensure that al-Qaeda can't rebuild its training bases and terrorist networks in Afghanistan, we'd also like to see the gains we've made over the last 20 years. And make no mistake, I mean, we've been there 20 years. There are certain gains that I think will be entrenched in certain regions of Afghanistan. And so to the best of our ability, we'll be supporting the gains we've made and ensuring that they continue.
And I would add on to that, I think we have to be honest with ourselves that is a risk that we are taking. There is a risk that the Taliban continue to gain more ground, take more territory. The fighting season is about to begin here in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be keeping a close eye on what's happening. Because most folks will recognize that the Afghan National Security and Defense Forces are not yet capable of standing on their own. So that means we have to do two things. I think we have to look at what is our assistance package to the government of Afghanistan and to security forces, and what logistical support we're able to still provide without a combat troop presence to allow them to maintain air superiority and air power. And then what long-range assets can we bring to bear to assist them and conduct the counterterrorism mission as well. So those are two things that I do not have the answers to right now, and I think are under development within the administration that we're going to have to look at in the months ahead.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question this morning comes from Paul McCree of Breaking Defense. Paul, you can go ahead.
Thanks for doing this morning. Just following up on that a bit, how much appetite do you think Congress will have to support the Afghan security forces, particularly SOF forces and the Air Force, which are where they have overmatch over the Taliban in the coming years? I mean, I think last year was about $3 billion or so. With flat budgets going forward, is this something that you think there's going to be some will be funded in the base budgets going forward?
Well, you kind of broke up there at the end, but I think there should still be appetite for a support package because pulling out the combat troops is one thing, but reducing our financial support is another challenge. Now, providing that financial support with fewer personnel there actually becomes harder, right? Because there's less oversight. We have to make sure we're combating corruption, that the support and the resources are getting to where they need to be, and it's not a dollar for dollar exchange. That money that goes there in conjunction with soldiers that are providing train, advise, and assist missions. So we're going to have to reassess how that money is spent. But certainly reducing that money, I think, would be a major detriment to not just Afghanistan, but also our efforts to counter China. Because you just can't look at Afghanistan itself in isolation. You have to look at the fact that Afghanistan sits at the crossroads of our geopolitical competition with Iran to the west and Pakistan to the east and China and Russia to the north. It's a very important strategic location for us, and we have continued interest in making sure that we have air flight rights, a diplomatic presence, and some intelligence resources as well.
Yeah, hey, this is Andy. I'll just jump in real quick here. So, two things that in particular I'm focused on in terms of what comes next, and this is, based off of my previous experience in working in the CT space, and how it is that we can be best postured to be able to be prepared if in the eventuality of a reconstitution of a terrorist threat emanating from Afghanistan. One is about intel posture and making sure that we can create and build upon the regional platform that we've been already developing over the last 20 years and working with our coalition partners as well as the Afghans to be able to make sure that is strong. That is something that we absolutely need to have. And number two is about maintaining capabilities of the Afghan National Security Forces, and in particular making sure we're preventing the atrophying of those capabilities after we are pulling out our combat forces out of there. So there's still ways that we can do that. I'm confident in that, but we have to make sure that that's resourced, because if we lose our eyes and ears through the intel capabilities and we do not have a capable partner on the ground that is able to deter or defend against a reconstituting terrorist threat, then we will be that would be a very bad situation to be in, and we need to make sure we don't let that happen. So absolutely expect that there to be support in Congress for continued action on those fronts.
Again, reporters, if you would like to ask a question of the co-chairs of the National Security Task Force, you may press *3 at any time. I know that these members are due in a House Armed Services Committee hearing shortly, but we do have time for a couple more questions. If folks want to press *3 to enter the queue, I will give it one moment, and if not, I will turn it over to the co-chairs to close. All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions at this time. I will hand it back to the co-chairs to close us out in reverse order. So, Congresswoman Sherrill, if you want to begin.
Sure. Well, thanks again, everyone, for being here with us. As you can see, this is an incredibly complex issue, But I do think that with the Biden administration's decision to pull out combat troops but not to end our relationship with Afghanistan and to do so in concert with our allies, that's been a critically important piece of this that was missing in the last administration. I also want to point something else out that I thought was very interesting that President Biden said. He said this might not have been how he would have chosen to do this had he started these negotiations, but that the former president has committed us to this path, and as the United States will continue to do this. I think the fact that this president takes our global commitments so seriously is critically important to reestablishing our integrity and the trust that nations can have and rely on with the United States across the world. So his decisions in this space, I think, have been very different from the last administrations, and I think very important for rebuilding our credibility across the world. But with that, I will turn it over to, I think, Andy Kim.
Yeah, thanks. No, great point, Mikey. And I really think that that's important. As often we talk about is, what is the meaning of the American handshake, and I think that that's something critically important. I'll just say this is a fast evolving issue, one that we're getting more and more developments on in the coming days and weeks. So I just reiterate that me, Jason, and Mikey, we're available and ready to stand by. If there's any follow-up here, we're certainly following it very closely. So if any other questions arise or want to dig in deeper, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. With that, I'll turn it over to Jason.
Yeah, thank you to my friends and colleague, Mikey and Andy, for your continued leadership on this, and Vice Chair Aguilar as well for convening this call. The bottom line is this is not any one administration's war. This is the American people's war. It is the American people that have funded it, that have done the fighting, the dying, the bleeding, and it's the American people that need to have transparency and have very important questions answered. And that's why we're going to continue to ask tough questions and ensure that there's accountability in the process as required under the National Defense Authorization Act to make sure that we are protecting our men and women in uniform and also doing right by our allies and those who have fought alongside us, including the Afghan interpreters and others, because the world is watching. I think we should make no mistake that there is honor to be had here in making sure that we are doing right by those who stood by our side. And we have to make sure that we are not repeating the mistakes of the past and we are keeping faith with those who we made promises to. And we will make sure that we're working very hard to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for joining this morning's call and for your attention to this important issue. This concludes this morning's event. Thank you so much.